Hi guys, so the idea of the acceptable service violations is that we can set a threshold for violations that occur during normal operations before the provider gets penalised for them. So again, this scenario begins with us creating an SLA guaranteed service. Then what we're going to do is introduce some CPU loading on the virtual machines, first of all to simulate user load. Then we're going to do it on the physical machines, which will actually generate iterative violations of those terms so that we can see the counters incrementing. So we log into the system. First of all, we're going to create a new service and we're going to call it expense system. So pretty straightforward name. And for the SLA template, we're going to select gold. Now we're going to change the default level of acceptable service violations to 2, just so we can demonstrate iteratively what we're doing here as these violations increment. For the first physical machine, we're going to create 2 of them, and we're just going to set the CPU speed on the first one to 2 GHz and on the second one to 1 GHz. So we'll click finish to provision those virtual machines. That just takes a couple of seconds. We can go back into the expense system, and if we browse through our tabs, we can see that there's no violations or warnings being generated for either of our virtual machines or at the service level either. So the next thing we want to do is generate some user load within the virtual machine. So to do that, we're just going to SSH into the first virtual machine that we've created. And we're going to run a CPU loading script just to simulate some demand from that virtual machine. Okay, so we go back then into our service, and we won't see any of the terms being violated because that virtual machine is being loaded now, but because there's no other loading going on the physical machine, it's able to get the amount of CPU resources it requires. But now we're going to log on to the physical machine and generate a CPU loading script on the physical machine. And if we go back into our violation history, we can see that a violation has now been generated. This is because the virtual machine, which has a loading script running in itself, is no longer able to get the requested speed that it needs. So it needs 2 GHz and it's only getting 0.04. So now we stop that loading script, and after a little while we can see that the terms have recovered, and the acceptable service violations has been incremented to 1, but it still shows as green because it's less than the threshold, and we can see in our history that we have recorded a violation happening. Now we're going to run the script for the second time. This will again generate another CPU speed violation. And now we can see that the acceptable service violations has generated a warning because it's been incremented from 1 to 2, and that 2 is the warning threshold. So remember that greater than 2 is going to generate the violation, less than 2 generates the warning. Okay, and finally what we're going to do is go back in and stop the script again. And stopping the script will just quickly demonstrate that we still have a warning for the acceptable service violations, but the CPU speed has recovered. The last step, of course, is now to violate the acceptable services threshold, and we can see that has now been violated. We've generated CPU load again on the physical host, which has caused the virtual one to generate a warning as it is not getting enough CPU. Okay, so that's basically the idea of the service violations demo. Thanks for watching it, and don't forget to visit us online.